Thanks for watching Numbskull News. And as you all know, there's been a ton of fake news forever. And music journalism is not excluded from this. Well, sometime in the 90s, some journalist out there did a story about the big four of the grunge movement. And of course, they used Nirvana, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, and Alice in Chains. As well they should have. But they excluded two bands. And all the years since, they keep excluding those same two bands. And it kind of pisses me off. I'm a fan of all six of these bands I'm going to be talking about. So, I want to make sure everyone gets their due. And in doing so, we got to set some criteria on what qualifies a band to be in this big six. So let's start with that original big four. What made them so legendary and so influential? Well, it starts with having a gigantic influential album. So what makes a great album? What makes a legendary album? Well, you have to have big hits, big singles that come off that album. And you have to chart high on the Billboard charts. Now, I'm going to use the top 200. And that could be any genre. That could be hip-hop, rock, country, Hispanic stuff like Selena. She was big back then before she got whacked by the president of her fan club. But, So that's the criteria I'm going to use. I'm not going to use albums sold. It's hard to find good factual information for albums sold. You get information from the year 2000, from 2016, 2017, and it doesn't include digital downloads. It doesn't include streams. So I'm ixnaying that. I'm just going to say all the albums that I'm going to be talking about in this video are multi-platinum albums. They're huge albums, big sellers. So let's get started with the first of our albums. Nirvana Nevermind came out September 24th of 91. 4 big hits. And it got to number 1 on the Billboard charts. Pearl Jam 10, August 27th of 91. 4 huge hits. Number 1 on the charts. Alice in Chains Dirt, September 29th, 92. 5 big hits. And ended up number 6 on Billboard. Soundgarden Super Unknown came out March 8th of 1994. It had 4 big hits on it. And number 1 on the Billboard charts. So as you can see, these albums are monsters. However, you can't just go off of one album. If so, then a band like Live would be right there with them. Live, Throwing Copper, came out April 26th of 94, had 3 big hits on it, and number 1 on the Billboard charts. So, that'll take us to our next set of criteria, which means you can't just have one album. You got to have 2 huge albums. Big hits, top of the charts. It's got to be there. If you want to make this list, it's got to be there. In Utero dropped it September 24th of 91. Had 2 big hits, 2 minor hits. Number 1 on the charts. Pearl Jam Versus came out October 19th of 93. 5 big hits, 5. And number 1, Billboard charts. Alice in Chains Jar of Flies, January 25th of 94. 3 big hits. And number 1 on the charts as well. Soundgarden Down on the Upside, 5/21 of 96. 3 big hits. Number 1. So now we know what it takes to be part of that big 4. So now let me try to expand this to the big 6 and introduce the next band that has been forgotten about or not included that should be. And let's start with none other than Stone Temple Pilots. STP's Core, 9/29/92, 5 big hits, number 3 on the charts. Then Purple drops on June 7th of 94 with 4 big hits and number 1. Now let me address some of the issues some people might have of Stone Temple Pilots being on this list. Such as, well, the band's first album didn't hit till 1992. Alright, a year after Pearl Jam came out. True, but they did form a year before Pearl Jam did. So, why did it take them so long? got me, but maybe because they were developing their sound. And, you know, a lot of critics back in the day said that Scott Weiland was copying Eddie Vedder's vocal style, which I don't think, I think that's bullcrap. It was similar. And if you look at both artists coming out with their second and third albums, their vocal styles changed into what they were going to be, and, you know, all the way till present day, or with Scott Weiland to the day he died. So when they first dropped their first initial albums, they were singing in lower keys, more baritone type of stuff. And I think the reason for that, because it was a safer place for these guys to be. And then as their egos grew and they got more sure of themselves, they found their real voices and then used those for the rest of their career. But there's really no argument for Stone Temple Pilots not to be a member of this Big Six. They're definitely big enough. They definitely had the albums. They had the sales. They had the place on the top 200 billboards. I don't know what the problem is. So now it's time for the sixth entry on the list, and it has to be the Smashing Pumpkins. Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness has 4 big hits, got the #1 on the charts, and October 23rd of 95 is when it dropped. Maybe that's a little late for you. Well, how about Siamese Dream, July 27th of 93, with 3 big hits, and number 10. There's still a couple of points people can argue about putting STP and the Smashing Pumpkins in with the other 4 bands. One of them is going to be, well, when you're talking about the grunge movement, we're talking about Seattle bands. And, you know, STP was from LA, the Smashing Pumpkins from Chicago, so they shouldn't qualify. Well, a lot of the guys that came from Seattle, they weren't from Seattle. And it was a movement. Sure, it started in Seattle, but these other bands had been around for a long time and developed their own sounds. You know, Stone Temple Pilots sounds like Stone Temple Pilots. Smashing Pumpkins sounds like Smashing Pumpkins. And the last I checked, Soundgarden didn't sound like anybody else. Neither did Pearl Jam or Nirvana or Alice in Chains. They're all different. So it doesn't really matter where the hell they come from. They're all part of the same movement. Whether you want to call it grunge or alternative, same difference to me, buddy. Now, the other argument they're going to have against Stone Temple Pilots and the Smashing Pumpkins is they denounce themselves as far as being grunge. Like Billy Corgan had always talked about, hey, don't put us in that group. We're not grunge. The thing is, Eddie Vedder did the same thing. To an extent, so did the guys in Nirvana. Hell, all of them. All the founders of grunge basically said, we're not grunge, don't call us grunge. All of them from Seattle. I mean, that was the times. All right. Unlike today, people back then didn't want to be labeled or put into groups. You know, we wanted to be individuals, have our own thing. You know, don't put us in with someone else. Even if we live next door to them or live with them, it doesn't matter. We are our own individual person, our own individual band. We have our own sound. We have our own style. So don't lump us in with anybody else. And those are points that Nirvana was making. Those were points that Soundgarden was making. So I don't really care what Billy Corgan says or what the rest of them say. Everyone has to fit in a genre somewhere. All right, so we called it grunge. Which, by the way, those kids from Seattle back in the 80s started calling themselves. So, anyway, thanks for watching this video. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't, maybe I don't care. But I'll be back with some other crap sometime. Bye.